I moved here full-time in 1983. And we lived in Short Beach, and we both had jobs in New Haven, and that was what our life was. And in about 1995, I finally connected with a land trust, and people started talking about the supply ponds. And I go, supply ponds? What are the supply ponds? So somebody said, oh, you have to go visit the supply pond. So they gave me directions, and I came up Mill Plain and went over Short Rocks. And I remember coming around the corner and seeing the ponds and thinking, oh my God, it's just so striking. You know, that here in this very urban feeling suburban town, there was something like this.
What do you think that we'll see?
I want to see a frog.
You want to see a frog?
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
I want to catch a frog.
All right, you can try to do that.
I failed to catch one yesterday.
My name is Jane Peterson Booley. In 2002, Jane Doherty Spielman and myself investigated what we found were many foundations and other aspects at Supply Pond that we really didn't know about and other people didn't know about. So we did historical research, walked the woods, and documented in a small booklet the history of Supply Pond. Now, the Supply Pond was really just Queech Brook, and the water company, starting in 1897, started acquiring this land to make the two supply ponds, there's actually two ponds, for the water supply for the town of Branford. So this was the first time water was going to be available to the people of Branford, so they didn't have to have wells. And once that happened, they, by eminent domain, acquired the land, dammed it, dammed the Queech Brook, made the two supply ponds, and had a whole distribution system to get water to Branford, especially in the center of town at first. So this, you think about what a massive operation that was to make these ponds, dam it. There was no steam at that time. It was all hand dug. Pretty incredible. And one aspect of the history of that, once the supply ponds were built, was icing, or using ice for refrigeration. Horse with a sort of a sled with blades on it would first clear the ice of debris and snow. Once that happened, they had a hand, again pulled by a horse, another saw type, I won't call it a saw, more like a blade that would cut the ice in squares, etch it. And then the men themselves would, with picks and saws, two-handed saws, go out and cut the ice where it was etched. And there's pilings still remnant in Supply Pond where they built this channel. So the ice flows would come into that channel and then go up to there was a conveyor belt from the pond up to the ice house. The ice was completely covered in sawdust, and then that ice would last the entire summer. And that icing operation went until the early 40s, until World War II. And so if you walk through the supply ponds, not only appreciate the ice operation that happened here, but look around, especially, look around carefully, not just where you're walking, to see all those old stone walls, to see the old foundations, and realize that the Goodrich family, this was their home, and they lived here for 250 years.
I was the first woman to be appointed to the Planning and Zoning Commission in 1963. Branford was the only place with what I considered the right kind of environment for us. It was a community with foresight to have planning and zoning. Saw the opportunity for the town to acquire what we call the supply ponds, which were part of the open space owned by the water company to protect its watershed in the New Haven area. They were anxious to start selling off some of the property, and so Branford was fortunate to be chosen as a community that might purchase the property and own it as a town. In those days, the federal government was providing funds for open space acquisition, whereby the federal government would pay half of the cost of the acquisition. The state government would pay a quarter, and that meant the town only had to pay 1/4 of the cost of acquisition. That amounted to something like $50,000 for the town. We did a study and met the federal requirements, and the town acquired the property, so that now we're celebrating 50 years of Branford owning this marvelous space. We were at the beginning of a larger movement to acquire open space. Opened the door to the concept of having a land trust, because with a land trust we could have the open space with forever guaranteed.
But you're a climber, so you're good.
Am I supposed to be over there?
So walk forward. Stay on the trail.
It's sort of the reason that all open space in areas like this gets protected, because somebody cares enough about it to say, no, I don't want to see houses there. I want to keep it open. You know, I've always walked there, or I rode my horse there. I want to keep it that way. I heard about the initial attempt in the mid-1990s to put in a golf course residential development. I was actually at a Wetlands Commission meeting about an issue that the Land Trust was involved in elsewhere in town when they came in and withdrew their application because it was clear that they were going to get a negative vote. So they withdrew it before it actually came to a vote. And then, you know, over the next couple of years, everything was sort of quiet, but I'd go out for walks with Lisa Santa Cruz, who was on the Conservation Commission and who had really kind of been the lead person in opposing the initial application. Danny Shapiro, who was chair of the Wetlands Commission. And, you know, just learning a little bit about supply ponds area, you know, walking the loop around the ponds, things like that. And saying at one point, you know, well, you know, can't we sort of get organized about this? And then in, I guess 1999, when they came back in with their second application, there were a group of us, me, Carol Lee Hall, who was on the Conservation Commission, and also at that time involved with Connecticut Fund for the Environment. CFE was very important in terms of opposing this particular development. They were an important ally. So 4 or 5 of us got together and, you know, tried to start organizing some things. We latched onto a group of neighbors who already were pretty well organized in terms of, you know, getting out, knocking on doors, trying to get people to oppose it. And I ended up sort of like, we called a public meeting and said, okay, so who's going to be, you know, the person up front? And everybody looked at me and said, you are. So I sort of became the face of it. I'd get out in the car, you know, drive around, go up Route 80, see what it looked like from this side, you know, all sorts of things.
Look, you found a beautiful little picnic spot.
Alewives, blueback herring, couple of other ones, smaller species of shad, which are important in the Connecticut River. Well, for as long as there was a dam on the supply ponds, the alewife run was blocked. So for years, there actually was a remnant landlocked population of alewives in Lindsley Lake, which eventually died out, maybe a hard winter or who knows what. But in 2006, the town, the Land Trust, and the Land Trust partnered with a number of other organizations, Connecticut Fund for the Environment. The fisheries people at DEP were very important, and we put in the fishway. It's added, you know, it's added more habitat for those fish. I mean, it's fairly typical that we'll get somewhere between 500 and 1,000 fish passing through the fish counter. You know, there's an area where, you know, you have wood frogs and salamanders that are going to be coming in to lay their eggs. some of the smaller ones, if they don't, if they sort of go dry for a decade or something, there are other ones close enough so that the 10% of the population that doesn't home in on the home pond will end up in another one, and you can reestablish populations there. So the size and the richness of different features really make it, I think, a very stable and important ecological resource. There are miles of trails here, and there are lots of trails that are not frequently used. It's really remarkable if you get up into the Queech, if you get onto some of the trails down on the south side of the ponds between there and the highway, you can walk for an hour and not run into anybody. So it's what you have is the core of the supply pond area where everybody goes to take their dog for a walk for a half an hour or to go for a walk themselves.
We've been living here near the supply pond for about 18 years. We just really enjoy it a lot.
Well, if you come here in a sad mood, I guarantee you leave with a happy face. Like 6 o'clock this morning, I wanted to be alone. I just wanted to be by myself with nature. And I saw a red-tailed hawk. It was quiet, it was peaceful, the sun was rising. I got my cup of coffee, I said, hey man, this is heaven. Right here, this is heaven.
I'm always impressed. Jeff comes earlier in the morning. Often my part coming through here is later in the day, even early evening. There are always people here.
There's
Absolutely all. And truly, in December or January, when it's dark by 5 o'clock, people are still trying to get that last walk.
See?
How you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Doing great, thank you.
It's just good to be out in nature. It's so important. It gives so much. You learn a lot, especially if you have young children. You can introduce them to the wildlife and why you should preserve this stuff. I mean, you got turtles that go back to the prehistoric period of time of the dinosaurs, the Triassic period. Right in front of you, you're seeing something that can live 100 years old, like the snapping turtles. You got the painted turtles, the spotted turtles. You got the birds that come here every year. You got the red-tailed hawks, the red-shouldered hawks. I'm just telling you what I've seen. And to get children to buy into nature is nothing better than going to the woods. That's the hope of next generations, to appreciate we only have one planet.
Tree gets cut down and falls over, it will eventually become soil.
Oh, okay. I'm here. Yes.
This is my mom right here.
Yes.
Say hello.
Hello. We like to talk about soil.
So my name's Chris Sullivan. I work for the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. I've been there for 10 years doing water quality work, sampling rivers and ponds and beaches.
I'm Suzanne Sullivan, and I work for Branford Public Schools. I am the science instructional coach, and I've been teaching science in middle school for a little over a decade. There's amazing open space in Branford. I mean, I think that the supply ponds is really the kind of crowning jewel of the open space, in that there's a wide variety of habitats here. There's accessible trails for people to be able to walk. And it's right in the center of town. It's also a really wonderful place for the water to have some of the sediment and the pollution removed before it continues out. There's just a tremendous number of streams that come into here and have an opportunity to settle out before going on to Long Island Sound. There's a lot of wildlife that really needs large open spaces without having roads cross them in order to be present. So we have a great diversity of migratory birds that come through. It's an exciting place to be in the spring and in the fall. We have significantly those very large woodpeckers, the pileated woodpeckers that you can hear in here. It's a beautiful place to be and to explore, and we have that because it's this large connected piece of open space. And so the town would be really different without it. And I think it also, I imagine that if this were all impervious surface where the water couldn't soak into the ground, it didn't have time to cool down, and just kind of keeping our air in general cooler here, I think that the town would physically feel the difference. We wouldn't know why, but it sure would be a lot hotter in the center of town. So this bench here that Isabella's sitting on, and it says "Always Something to See," is a dedication to Noble Proctor, who was a professor at Southern and an ornithologist and just a tremendous advocate for birding and natural history. And he had so much impact on really any biologist, birder that you meet in this area. They have very fond memories and learning experiences with Noble Proctor. It was a loss when he passed, but he would say there's always something to see, which is true. So anytime you'd come to the supply pond, you'd often see him here. But that was an important lesson that he left for us. Felicia, come here.
Northern water snake, I think.
Can you go down there with me?
No, look, there's a snake right there. Do you see? Okay.
Oh my gosh, I see it.
You see it?
It's right there.
It does look like a water snake.
I think it is. It's got a little bit.
It's got all that red, yeah. And we saw the damselflies, gorgeous damselflies with.
Yeah, the ebony jewel wings up in the trees. They have a bright, shiny body with the black wings.
Features from each season that make this place really special. In the summer, we get to see a ton of wildlife. It's warm. All the leaves are out, and we hear the birds singing. And so it's really very accessible for everybody. In the spring, we get to see wildflowers that only bloom in the spring. These spring ephemerals come out. And in the fall, of course, you can imagine the colors here are spectacular. And in the winter, it is glorious and peaceful. And when the snow falls, it has that perfect New England feel to it. It's like 6:15. We can come back. We will come back. So you see, it's a spot. It's a spot. People stop with their dogs and.
Connecticut is remarkably rich in places that have the same kinds of values, conservation values, as the supply ponds do. If we lost any of them, we as a state would be worse off for that. I think in 10 years that we all will recognize it if we were to go back. I think actually people that were instrumental in acquiring it in 1969-70 would recognize it when they come back. It's not going to change that much. Ideally, we'll have more people hiking on the trails or bicycling. There's certainly new technology that will make it easier for people to get on the trails. We're not doing so much here in Branford yet. In Guilford, they've put a big effort into digitizing their trail maps, and that's something that would be very nice to have here, I think. And I expect that over the coming years that we'll probably start trying to do that.
You can talk about nature, you can have films on nature, but if you lose something like this, it's done forever. It's gone forever. And that's a shame. This should stay the way it is and let nature develop it on its own.